Welcome to the Better Than Yesterday Everyday Podcast, where we cover anything related to behavior change that will increase your long-term wellness and happiness. And now, here are your hosts, personal trainer and RNs, Matt and Jenna Lane.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Better Than Yesterday Everyday Podcast. My name's Matt.
And I'm Jenna.
And together we run MattLaneFitness and the Better Than Yesterday Everyday Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Today we're going to talk about anxiety. And to be quite honest, my heart's racing and my palms are sweaty.
Are they really?
Talking about anxiety because I'm going to talk about my own personal struggle with anxiety, which, of course, produces anxiety, talking about my anxiety. So it's a great cycle.
Well, and if this is your first time tuning in, this podcast is all about self-improvement, mental fitness, basically your overall wellness. We want to bring you value, of course, through fitness, but mainly through that behavior change. Before we dive into this, I want to hit you with my gratitude of the day. That's what this portion of the show is. And I'd have to say that today I'm just very grateful to have lungs to breathe. As corny as that sounds, being in healthcare, we're registered nurses and we do have a day job, and we see it very often that people don't have such a basic function. So I'm glad to be able to breathe.
It's a good one.
Right?
I think in keeping with the subject of this podcast, the thing that I'm grateful for is having you and being so forward-thinking and really helping me learn new coping mechanisms to deal with my anxiety, to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable, and really getting out of my comfort zone and really forcing me out there to learn new things and do new things that would normally just really shut me down with anxiety.
I'm glad that I have that effect on you, and it's interesting to hear that from you.
It hasn't always been willingly.
Yeah. Well, no, but it's interesting to hear that because, like, I guess I don't set out to do that, but I'm glad that I do that for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you've really taken the lead in changing us from being just the cookie cutter couple of being in a bunch of debt and working jobs that we hate forever and ever and ever, to really opening up our minds to different possibilities.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
and speaking of taking control, I don't think that I have less anxiety, but I think you have. I think our anxieties are multifaceted. Definitely, my anxiety is about self-confidence, money, and certain things. I feel that yours is different, and I'm going to let you lead this podcast.
Yes. So my brain works, I think, very differently than yours for sure. Mm-hmm. And from most people, where something happens and I break it down piece by piece and overanalyze everything. I've always tried to put myself in other people's shoes and see their perspective, which I think is a great asset of mine. That's just the way my brain works.
Sure.
But it also produces a lot of anxiety of trying to break something down of, well, why did they say that? Or why did they react that way? And putting myself in their shoes and really putting the blame back on myself because they're reacting to something that I did wrong.
That's deep. Okay.
So someone who's really, really helped me with dealing with my anxiety and shame and vulnerability, which are all not necessarily the same terms, but they all coexist together, is Brené Brown.
Yeah.
And so she came on to the scene much more when she did a TED Talk several years ago about vulnerability.
What are her qualifications, or what is she?
She, I believe she's a PhD in social work. She's an LCSW. She's got a PhD, and she teaches. And that TED Talk really accelerated her to the forefront, talking about courage and vulnerability.
Okay. And we can link that in the description. We'll make sure to put that in the notes.
Yeah, and the reason why I found her is I just looked up like top 10 TED Talks one day, and I listened to hers, and it really stuck in my brain what she had to talk about with vulnerability and making yourself vulnerable. And then recently she put out a Netflix special that touched on all kinds of really important topics that really hit home for me. I think every time I've watched it, I think I've watched it 4 or 5 times.
Have I watched it? Have I watched it?
Yeah. I remember there was one night you were editing, and I think I came back and told you like 6 times, like, come out here and watch this, come out here and watch this, come out here and watch this. But every time I watch it, I pull something else very important out of that special that I didn't get the first time. So it's definitely worth watching, if not once, maybe 10 or 20 times.
What's it called?
That's a good question. But it's definitely, if you type in Brene Brown on Netflix, it pulls it up.
Okay.
And so she talks a lot about courage and vulnerability. And so some of her points, and this ties into why I'm talking about anxiety today, is that you need to tell your story to stop that cycle of anxiety and shame and vulnerability. Because once you tell your story, you've put it out there, you've verbalized it, and you stop that cycle of shame and anxiety.
So the anxiety part makes sense. Shame and vulnerability.
So for me specifically, and I've watched, of course, a lot of Brene Brown. I would say I probably owe her money for all of the therapy she's given me for free. But I think what I can boil the source of most of my anxiety down to is perfectionism, where I don't allow myself to make mistakes. And if I do make a mistake, I cannot bring myself to say it out loud. That's a source of extreme shame and anxiety for me. But perfectionism is unattainable for anyone. So I set these standards for myself that I'm never going to accomplish. And then I speak to myself like I would never speak to someone that I love.
So give me just an example of perfectionism. Like if I didn't know you, like if I had never met you, so I have noticed that perfectionism with you. Like every nursing job that I've ever seen you in, you're the type of person that's very calculated, can move very quickly once you understand the role, and you're just very precise, and you'll do it the same way every single time, and it's extremely efficient. But for somebody that doesn't know you, what is an example of some sort of perfectionism that you can think of that would give you anxiety?
Well, I don't know about a specific example. I know I set very unattainable goals for myself. So, and I don't allow myself room for error. And so when I don't get something accomplished, even if my coworker that does the exact same job, there's no way that they would get that accomplished, and how I could look at them and say, oh yeah, there's no way you could have gotten that accomplished today. You're just fine.
So even if you know it's logical, you're still going to chase after perfection.
If I didn't get it accomplished in that same amount of time and it was the same amount of work, I would be down on myself because I didn't accomplish what I should have accomplished.
Even if it was illogical. That's what I meant to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
So by that perfectionism, I hide my true self, and I create this version of myself that doesn't exist in my head.
Whoa. I heard you, but say it again.
By trying to achieve perfectionism, I create a version of myself that doesn't exist.
Wow. Okay, keep going. I like that.
Because I'm not perfect. Yeah. Nobody is.
Yeah.
But that's what I try to attain. So every time I know that I'm slipping, that I might not be right there at perfectionism, that produces anxiety. Mm-hmm. So that makes me work harder, work faster, put my self needs behind me to put to the forefront what everybody else thinks or what everybody else sees. So
okay, what everyone else sees, very, very big right there.
Yes. So it doesn't matter who I really am. What matters most is who people see or who people think I am.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then it's also a part of that is being afraid of people realizing who I really am. That I'm some sort of monster in reality, when really I'm just like everybody else. I'm not perfect. But I have a hard time admitting that I've made a mistake or I fell short, even though it might be still a great accomplishment of whatever I was trying to do. If it's not the unattainable standard that I set for myself, it's unacceptable. Mm-hmm.
No.
Which allows me to accomplish a lot in what I'm doing, but it also creates this unhappiness because I'm never going to attain this perfectionism.
Okay. So, I was trying to reach for like an example earlier. Like, is there anything in fitness, like physically, body wise, is there any perfectionism in your brain that's ever given you any anxiety in that realm?
So when I was going to the gym, yes.
Okay, good.
Because I feel like that's in my mind, at least then, because my body didn't have the ability to be doing any of these movements. Okay. There was no muscle memory. There was no knowledge. I was literally that person standing beside the machine, reading those little tiny pictures, trying to figure out how in the world this machine works and trying to make sure nobody saw me. And that was most important to me, was making sure no one saw me reading the instructions.
Man, so that distracted from you even being able to figure out the movement. Okay.
So now me working out with nobody watching, including you.
Okay.
There's no shame in that because I can make as many mistakes as I want. I can work out as hard or as little as I want. Nobody sees me. So there's no shame in that.
And to clarify, so Jenna works out at home and I don't even get to see her work out.
Yes. So there's still that like shame and anxiety, and even though I feel like I've accomplished a lot and I'm proud of the accomplishments.
Yeah. You're down 40 pounds, right?
Yeah. And I can actually see muscles, and I think Matt can attest to the fact that
it's so funny.
Flex my arms all the time.
I have to give them that real quick. So Jenna's watched me for 10, 11 years now being into fitness. My body's changed. So all the time I'd hit like a double front bicep pose. And I'm like, look at my abs. Like, look at my quads. Look how much bigger I'm getting. For years, she has watched that. And here recently, she started doing the same exact thing. And I'm like, I now see what you went through for 10, 11 years now. But it's
payback.
It's so cool to see. It's so awesome to see like your confidence in that. It's so cool to see.
Yeah. And I think that's helped with my anxiety everywhere as well. So, and you do bring up a good point about the working out. So that's my meditation and motion in the morning. Mornings tend to be the most anxiety producing part of my day because I haven't started my day yet. So I'm already anxious about what's going to happen, what might happen. So I go in that room in the dark, in the quiet, and sweat halfway to death. And I make sure that I work so hard that I can't think of anything else other than just making it through this next movement. And it just clears my head. It allows me to relax. And some of the other things throughout the day that I find myself doing, and for the longest time, I thought it was just my anxiety specifically, but reading about anxiety, I think it's common symptoms of you clench your jaw, you grind your teeth, your shoulders come up, you clench your shoulders, you furrow your brow, you squint your eyes. Those are all really common signs and symptoms of anxiety. And so I've really tried to break that cycle of when I feel my eyebrows coming together, I stop it. I release my jaw, I release my shoulders, and I do that active muscle relaxation techniques.
Isn't that the technical term for it?
I think so.
Yeah.
So
if not, you just made it up. Yeah, trademark
that. But so you just start at the top of your head and you release your forehead, you release your eyebrows, you release your eyes, you release your tongue, you release your jaw, and you just move down your body. And this does not have to take 20 minutes. This can literally take 10 seconds.
It's a conscious effort. You can do it right now as you're listening.
Yeah. And while you're doing that active muscle relaxation, you also just take some deep breaths. And it really just helps you reset and refocus, because once you get into that anxiety cycle, you really can't sort out what's in front of you. So if you have a bunch of things that you're supposed to be multitasking and that's what's causing your anxiety, from my experience, I have to stop and reset for a second, or I'm not going to get any of it accomplished.
So I've heard you say this before, and you said it on one of the previous podcasts. But as far as your actual anxiety being in the morning, do you have any idea why? Like you make it sound like right when you wake up, you have anxiety about the day, because that's basically what you said. I wonder why that is. Any idea why that may be? And if you don't have an answer, it's okay.
I mean, I think it's because I have no idea what's about to happen during my workday specifically. So it's not, I don't have that anxiety on my days off because I generally know exactly what I'm about to do on my days off.
Wow.
Where when it's work or doing something that I've not done before, which, most people, if you deal with the public, you know that every day is a different day.
Yeah.
So it's that anxiety of what's going to happen today. What am I going to do? How am I going to deal with it? Am I going to make a mistake? That's what causes my anxiety to escalate in the morning.
Okay. That makes more sense. That's so to the listener, I think that's a very important question to ask. And my next question is that you not being able to deal with the anxiety? Is that because your job or your role or your career is extremely high stress? Maybe it's not 100% your fault. Maybe it is the environment that you're in. And there might not be a right or wrong answer for that, but that was a thought that just sprung in my head.
Well, it can be. I think that's a factor for sure, but it's also managing your anxiety, because you can have anxiety doing any job.
Yeah, true.
Because I truly love my job.
Yeah.
But I also, it can be difficult. And I think even when I worked a different job, I still had anxiety that just manifested in different ways. Yeah. I'm an anxious person. I'm always going to have anxiety. There's no cure for my anxiety. It's just learning how to manage it and adapt to it to be able to function. Yeah.
That makes sense. And to put it into context, we're both registered nurses, and we work in hospice. I guess when you boil that down, it's probably anxiety driving for sure. End of life and all that, but it is a very rewarding field.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I think we're both very passionate about.
Yeah.
But I also know myself, and I know that when I was in high school and I worked at Burger King, I had just as much anxiety before I went to work every day.
Then there you go. So you're that means you're very self-aware. That makes sense.
Yeah. I wasn't then. Right. I remember specifically there was a day, I believe I got out of class at 2:50 and I had to be at Burger King by 3:15 or 3:30. So I had a very short time to get from school to work and be changed. And so most of the time I actually changed while I was driving down the interstate to work, which was a really smart teenager thing to do. But I was about to merge onto the on-ramp to get on the interstate, and somebody rear-ended me one day. And my immediate thought was, I'm going to be late for work. I can't be late for work. I can't be late for work. So I got out. The lady, I drove this junker car that had a steel bumper, and this lady behind me who was driving a BMW, it ripped her entire bumper off. And of course it didn't even scratch my steel bumper. And I was like, are you okay? I'm okay. I got to get to work. Bye.
I remember you telling me that
and
story.
I literally, I fled a scene of an accident because I couldn't be late to work. There's no deviation from the rigid rules that I've set for myself. I could not be late for work.
Yeah.
I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I just got in a car accident. There should be some leeway of, hey, I was late for work because someone hit me. That's acceptable to be late for work because you got in a car accident. But to me, I couldn't be late to work.
Yeah. Wow.
So it goes way back.
Yeah, it does. Well, and what's funny is I remember you telling me that when you did work at Burger King, you worked the drive-through, but you would be cleaning tables and you could add up. But granted, you are a very intelligent person, but you could add up somebody's order of all those different things, and you knew even the tax, the total.
Yeah. So.
I think that's that perfection piece that you were talking about.
Yes, absolutely. I had everything on the menu memorized so that I could add it up and clean tables and get their drinks to them and have the best drive-through time. Yeah. That was a source of anxiety too, was having the best drive-through time in our group of restaurants, because we had a contest of who had the best drive-through time.
There you go. So you've always created pressure for yourself.
Yes, that was never asked of me.
Wow. Self-induced pressure.
Yes.
Okay.
And it goes back to that perfectionism. So the source of my anxiety might not be the source of other people's anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think that's why when we were talking about the subject for this podcast, you didn't really understand where I was coming from as far as why I gravitated towards talking about perfectionism, but that's my source of anxiety.
Well, I think that's a good segue into sort of my area of anxiety. And again, I think it's multifaceted. It's not like, perfectionism is the only reason you have anxiety. And for me, it's not just this one reason that I'm going to mention. But for me, the entire time you've known me, money has always been I have a bad relationship with money that I'm actively working on. And I feel that I'm doing a better job with it now.
Definitely.
And you asked a good question off of the podcast. You said, what is it that drives anxiety because of the money? And my immediate reaction was, it's because I feel like I don't have any control. I feel like I don't have any control. And for a long time, I just thought, I just have to make more money. I just need to make more. When, I didn't really necessarily look at what was going out. And, I now equate money management to the same way I equate fat loss or weight gain. If you don't know how many calories are going in versus how many calories are going out, if you're not tracking your calories, then you're not going to be able to attain your goals. And it's the same thing with your money. If you don't know how much is going in versus how much is going out, you're not going to be able to attain your financial goals.
That's a really good analogy.
It's true.
Because it helps you understand money in versus money out is the same idea of calories in versus calories out. I think that helps bring your anxiety about it down.
Yeah.
Because you understand the calories part, so that helps you understand the money part.
Yeah. And I know that you have noticed that I've been a little bit more neurotic about watching money lately.
Yes.
But it's been intentional. And I'll give these action points to you. So I've been using this app called Acorns for a long time. Basically, you can it's in the App Store. I think it's $1 per month. You can tie it to your checking, savings, basically any account that you have. And anytime you spend any money, let's say you go into a grocery store and you spend $1.50, because that's a logical amount to spend. The remaining 50%, 50 cents of that $2 is going to go into an account, in this Acorns account. Once you stack up $5, that money goes into the stock market. You do that over and over and over. You don't realize that 50 cents that just keeps getting thrown in there. So it's really, really good. I swear by it. I also started using this app called Truebill. Truebill, it ties into all of your accounts and it monitors your spending. I mean, it'll tell you your recurring payments. It'll tell you, how you can reduce the cost. So I've been actively trying to figure out tools to manage my money, and my anxiety has been so much lower because I just truly know where the money's going.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I felt so much better about it. And before, I was just sticking my head in the sand, and that perpetuated the anxiety.
Yeah, definitely.
My head was in the sand, and I was just like, what do I do? I'm just not going to deal with it. I literally was unable to look at my account. I was unable to open up my account. I just don't want to see it. I would rather have like an overdraft charge than look at it, when it's just right there and fixable.
Yeah. Yep. So, and at one point I haven't made, and I think is important to talk about, is my aha moment of realizing that I have anxiety. Because
Same here.
It's almost embarrassing to admit. But I went to the doctor several years ago. So I was, say, maybe 30. And I've been in the medical field since I was 20. So I've pride myself in assessing and knowing signs and symptoms. And I go and I talk to her, and we sit and have a long conversation, and she suggests a medication for me to try. And she says, and it really helps with anxiety too. And she gave me this look like, because you need it. And then, we end the conversation. She gets up, she leaves. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, what is she talking about? I don't have anxiety. What do you mean? What do you think? What do you think I said to her that made her think that I have anxiety? What did I say wrong? What's going on? Why does she think that? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that cycle of 500 questions I just asked myself.
And that caused anxiety.
Yes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am anxious. Like I'm anxious about being told that I'm anxious.
Yeah. Were you offended at all when she said it?
Absolutely. Because I'm perfect. I don't have anxiety. So that was a really big aha moment of, okay, I have anxiety. So now I have a diagnosis of why I get headaches constantly.
Yeah.
Why I, grind my teeth, why I do all these things. Oh, I put a name to it. And even though it's one of the most common diagnoses ever, probably, I still didn't see it in myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize that I could easily identify it in someone else, but I did not identify it in myself.
Well, and it makes sense that, but I think that point right there is where you can start to grow from it.
Absolutely.
And for me, how I relate what you just said is the money in versus the money out. Like I realized it's a problem. This is how I start to fix it. It's not the fix, but I have anxiety behind money. So that,
yeah, that's absolutely step one is just to boil it down to.
There's a light bulb. Yeah. I have anxiety.
Yeah. And then boiling it down to, well, what causes my anxiety? And that's taken a long time to really identify for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I enjoy absolutely everything I hear and watch from Brene Brown is that she talks about vulnerability and courage and shame, which I feel like she's talking directly to me every time I watch something of hers.
Well, and speaking of the anxiety and the perfectionism and all that, that is directly correlated to how we're doing this podcast. So I've been doing YouTube for a long time now, but real serious at the time of this recording, about a year. And it has been really, really, really difficult to let go of perfectionism when it comes to these videos, when it comes to these podcasts, not scripting it out too much. I don't want to make this so robotic. Jenna, you and I have talked about this. If we make it too scripted, it's not going to be authentic and nobody's going to listen. I wouldn't want to listen to that.
Absolutely.
But that has been a major pain point for me. And so this podcast is a piece of my growth as a creator to I'm not going to edit this. I'm going to keep the ums in, and I'm going to keep all these natural pieces to it. And
that's what makes it authentic.
Exactly.
I think you're absolutely right.
So to the people listening, this is not going to sound perfect, and I am okay with that as much as I'm not okay with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something to point out is that you had the idea of me being on a podcast, maybe 6 months ago, and I put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off. And when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to suck it up and do this, I had a great time on that podcast.
Yeah.
And it was finished. We were done. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do another one. I had so much anxiety about doing that podcast and just talking about myself, which makes me vulnerable. And then talking about my vulnerability and talking about my weight, which is something that I absolutely refuse to talk about most of the time.
Of course.
Was very anxiety producing for me. But once I got through it, I was like, oh, well, that didn't hurt at all.
Yeah.
It actually felt good. And I want to share my story.
Yeah.
And that being uncomfortable really was a positive experience.
Yeah. So do you think learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable reduces anxiety?
Absolutely.
Eventually.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very distressing for someone who has anxiety and loves to live in their comfort zone to be uncomfortable. But once you've done it a couple of times, even if you only have a few positive experiences, you realize that you made it through them all. I mean, if both of us and anyone listening, you've made it through 100% of your uncomfortable situations so far.
Yeah.
So they don't kill most of us. So they haven't killed me yet. But I also do want to make a point of, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, okay, I don't have anxiety, I have not related to anything in this podcast, I think I do have something for you too, is that we all interact with people every day, and oftentimes our loved ones who do have anxiety, and even people with anxiety have trouble relating to other people with anxiety, just like
I was having difficulty relating to your point of anxiety.
Yeah. So I think a point there is to just learn how to ask the right questions rather than making statements. And I found a good thing on Pinterest that kind of illustrated it pretty well. Of instead of making statements like "quit being dramatic," "it's easy, come on, pull yourself together, you're just being lazy." Those are
non-therapeutic forms of communication.
And they're not questions, and they shut the person down who may be willing to open up to not just tell you what's going on, but saying it out loud is really the therapeutic way to just let it go.
Yeah. Shoot for those open-ended questions rather than closed-ended.
Yeah. So, and of course, don't ask these questions unless you really mean it.
Right.
But just acknowledging, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? What's the best way for me to help you? I want to understand. Saying things like that really helps someone open up. And I think you can use those just very obvious but simple and helpful questions. Help someone open up, whether it's somebody who's upset or angry or anxious.
Yeah.
That way you can understand better. And it helps, I think, once you say it out loud, once you tell your story, it really helps you just release it.
Yeah. I like it. It makes a lot of sense. And I was just sitting here thinking about a good friend of ours that has crazy anxiety, claustrophobia. And I was just thinking, like, that person feels a loss of control and confinement. And yeah, I'm connecting dots here in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so somebody else that we really both listen to a lot is Gary Vee. Mm-hmm. And I watched a piece of content of his recently where he said, perfection is a disguise for insecurity. And that really hit home for me.
I love that.
Because I think my insecurity is not being perfect, and that's what causes my anxiety. That really hit home for me that it was, my perfectionism was just trying to hide my anxiety or my insecurity, and that's what causes my anxiety.
From a creator standpoint, I'm paraphrasing. I always come back to saying it like this: perfectionism is the killer of production. Meaning, I can sit here and work on something for forever, but really and truly, I just need to get the message out. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yep.
I like that saying.
Yep, me too.
Is that it?
Maybe. I thought I had something else I wanted to say, but now I forget. Oh, so I do. I'm looking at my notes. So I read an article not too long ago where there's a lady in Europe that they found has never experienced anxiety, and they were testing her DNA and that sort of thing to try to find that gene where anxiety is absent from or whatever.
And we'll link this in the podcast description.
And it made me think, what would my life be like if I didn't have anxiety? If I wasn't hindered by fear and anxiety, what would I do? What would I accomplish? And how can I work towards that?
And take a second and even pause the podcast. What would your life be like if you did not have anxiety? Pause it. Think. Okay. Are you back? Nice. That would be really crazy. Like, I immediately think, how much more would I get done? Like, how much farther would I be in quote unquote success? Like, what sparks in your head of that, Jenna?
I don't know. I live with anxiety. I can't imagine my life without anxiety. But I know that we both would have accomplished a lot more because we weren't hindered by anxiety. I think that drives a lot of things. For you, I think when you're anxious, you have a hard time getting things done because everything kind of gets jumbled in your head.
I mean, basic things or creative things or both?
Everything.
Yeah.
I think when you have a lot of things on your to-do list and they seem complicated. You just can't get anything done because you're so anxious about your to-do list.
What's interesting, and the reason I realized that I have anxiety at 29 years old was simple things that I could not get done, that I was overwhelmed. I was so anxious that I couldn't get simple stuff done. And you've noticed it that like the house will be less tidy because like I literally won't put my shoes up, in the closet, which rightfully so. You have a good reason to throw a plate at my head, but
disclaimer, I've never thrown a plate at your head.
No, you're very, very patient with me. But have you ever have you noticed that? Because that was an aha moment for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think to kind of wrap it up maybe is just so step one, I think we talked mostly about our step ones, is realizing that you have anxiety.
Yeah.
And then two, really boiling it down to what causes your anxiety.
What are those triggers?
Right.
Yeah.
Because you can't really work on those triggers unless you figure them out first. And then, of course, the next step would be to work on not having those triggers trigger your anxiety. Like, how do you work through that when you do get triggered?
Yeah.
And it's as simple as things for me is literally like just relaxing my shoulders and putting my shoulders back, taking 3 deep breaths. If I'm, moving floors in the building that I work in, taking the stairs, just getting my, concentration on not falling down the stairs, that gets my mind off of the 400 things that I have in front of me to do that's made me so anxious. And just something like that. Like if I'm, walking across the building and I can cut through outside, let's just go outside and get some sunlight for, the 10 seconds it takes you to run across the courtyard. Yeah. Those things are not huge and they don't take up time during the day, but they make me so much more productive because I can instantly reduce my anxiety and refocus and continue on rather than just spinning down into an infinite hole in the ground.
You put that so well. I don't want to butcher it with more of my words. I think you did really. That was a perfect way to end that. If you don't have anything else to say, I think that was a good wrap up.
Well, of course, I think so too.
Well, yeah, that's about it. Guys, thank you so much for coming back and listening. If you're new, please subscribe. We would really appreciate it. From the release of the first episode up until 8 weeks, if you leave a review on iTunes and then drop me a message at MattLaneFitness@gmail.com saying that you left a review, I'll go through, verify that. And I am going to send you a free Better Than Yesterday Everyday Podcast t-shirt. Thank you so much. These reviews are huge for us. The first 8 weeks of launching a podcast is very, very important for the growth of the podcast. So thank you. Please subscribe, share, tell everybody you know. And we always want to bring value. So thank you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Better Than Yesterday Everyday Podcast. We want to thank you for listening and invite you to subscribe to the show as well. And follow Matt Lane Fitness on YouTube. Until next time, you don't have to be perfect. Just be better than yesterday every day.